everyone, this is Lomi, and this week I'm making a cute little princess dress for Lulu, my Littlefee. I'm starting with the skirt, which is plain cotton fabric with an embroidered tulle overlay. You might recognize this lace from the shoe video I did a while back. I've wanted to use this material for ages. I get started by using a zigzag stitch along the sides and top edge of the skirt piece, which connects these two layers and keeps them from sliding around when I'm sewing later. I'd made one of these dresses back when I still sold things on Etsy, and I regretted selling it, but at least I can make another for me. As always, the pattern is available on my website's pattern archive. But if you have difficulty accessing my website, you can send me an email and I'll make sure you get whichever pattern you want. After zigzagging the edges, I fold the sides of the skirt in about 1/4 inch and pin them in place. I'll sew these down with a straight stitch so that the back of the dress has a tidy finish later on. While I'm filming this video, I'm also doing something new and streaming the process live on Instagram, so hopefully trying to work 2 cameras at once doesn't mess things up. Next up is the front panel of the bodice. This will have the embroidered overlay on it too, but the piece needs to be hemmed first. I run a zigzag stitch along the top edge, then fold the edge down 1/4 inch and sew it in place with a straight stitch. Now it has a nice finished top edge, and I can put on the overlay. Like with the skirt, I'll use a zigzag stitch on the edges of the piece to hook them together. I'll go down the sides and across the bottom, leaving the top unstitched so that it retains its pretty scalloped shape. Then it's time to hem the sleeves. Construction of the bodice comes after all the pieces are ready. I'll hem the sleeves by running a zigzag stitch along the bottom edge of both sleeve pieces, then turning the edge in 1/4 inch and sewing it down to create the hem. I want to add some lace to the edge of the sleeve, so I put that on the inside edge and sew it on at the same time I'm doing the hem. That way, I won't have too many visible seams on the sleeve. Next, I add elastic to the bottom of the sleeve to help gather it. My Littlefee has magnetic hands, so she's easy to dress, but the elastic really helps the older dolls that weren't magnetic. I lay this on top of the hem and add a few stitches to hold it in place. Then, with the needle down through the elastic, I grab the elastic and stretch it all the way out. I'll sew it on with a zigzag stitch, but that means pulling hard on the elastic to keep it stretched forward, and pulling hard on the thread tails behind the machine's foot to make sure it feeds back under the needle instead of bunching up when the elastic pulls forward. This can be a little difficult, but the end result is a nice, stretchy gathered sleeve. We'll finish both sleeves this way. Now I'll take the front pieces of the bodice and run a zigzag stitch along that front curved edge. This is where it will connect to the finished center panel, so this edge needs to be finished too. After these edges are finished, I'll connect the front side to the back pieces, pinning them together at the shoulder and sewing the shoulder closed, backstitching at the beginning and end. That seam looks a little rough, so I'll go over it again. That's better. I'll sew the other front side and back pieces together in the same way, then finish the edge of the seam on both pieces with a zigzag stitch. I probably should have done that step first, because then I could finish the back of the neckline in one go, when I was doing that curved front. Oh well, it doesn't really change anything, it just adds a few seconds to do it this way. Before moving on, I finished the center of the back by running a zigzag stitch along that straight edge. This will become the rear closure. After the edge is finished, I fold the edge to the inside by 1/4 of an inch and sew it in place. I do this on both sides. Now I'll finish the back portion of the neckline, which I missed before. See, just takes a few seconds. I finished the back opening before the neckline, because I feel like this gives a neater result around the neckline. Now these two sides of the bodice will be connected to the embroidered front panel. Put the front side and center panel pieces together with right sides together, with the embroidered panel's edge lined up with the curved edge of the front side panel. That sounds really complicated when I say it, but hopefully you can just see what I mean. Since these edges are already finished, it's just a matter of sewing these two pieces together with a straight stitch, making sure to backstitch at beginning and end. The other side goes on the same way. Backstitch, sew, backstitch. Next up is finishing the neckline. I'll be doing this by hand because the hem is really narrow. The edge of the front side above the embroidered panel and the edge of the back neckline get folded to the inside. Then I start in the seam allowance on the inside of the bodice. I'll stitch this hem down using really small stitches. Hopefully the camera is close enough that you can see how tiny these stitches are. You don't want to catch more than a thread or two of the fabric. As long as you keep these stitches itty-bitty, they won't really show in the end. Of course, if you prefer to sew this by machine, you totally can. You can even add some more lace around the neckline if you want. Customization is great, and you're making things for your doll, so do it your way. The next thing to do is gather the top edge of the sleeves. My camera was not cooperating and ate that video clip, but fortunately I used a contrasting thread to gather with, so you can see exactly what I did. Just use little hand stitches to gather, and leave tails on your thread long enough to move the gathers around as you fit it to the armhole. This will get put against the armhole of the bodice with right sides of the fabric together. It's easiest to pin the ends of the sleeves to the ends of the armhole, then move the gathers around to fit the sleeve into the rest of the armhole. I pin it in place at first, but since this is such a tiny space, I'll be using basting stitches to hold the sleeve in place before I sew it by machine. If you're not comfortable going around tiny curves like this with your machine, it's fine to just attach the sleeve by hand too. Once the basting is done, I use my machine to sew the sleeve into the armhole, then pull out the gathering and basting threads, since they aren't needed anymore. Then I finish the new seam with a zigzag stitch, and repeat this same process with the other sleeve. The bodice is almost done. I'll close the sides by folding them shut and pinning them, so I can sew up the bottom of the sleeve, turn in the armpit, and sew down the side of the bodice to close it completely. As is common in tiny sewing patterns, you can see my pieces have shifted a bit, so the back of the bodice is longer than the front. This can happen when pieces aren't perfectly aligned, or if they stretch unevenly, or just if you accidentally cut a piece a little larger than others. In human-sized clothing, issues like these aren't really noticeable, but in tiny scale, the tiny differences can add up into big gaps. It's not a problem though, as it can be compensated for when the skirt is attached. When closing the sleeve, make sure to backstitch at the end, to hold the elastic securely and keep the sleeve from coming apart. Backstitch at the bottom of the side too. This gives you good strong seams. After the sides are closed, I finish the seams with a zigzag stitch, trim my thread, and turn the bodice right side out. Pretty cute, huh? Now it's finally time for the skirt. I start by running a line of really long stitches along the very top edge of the skirt piece. I'll grab hold of one of the thread tails at the end of the seam and pull hard to gather the fabric. Super easy and faster than gathering by hand. Then the skirt and bodice go together with right sides together. I pin the ends of the skirt to the ends of the bodice first. This is where I compensate for that extra length in the back pieces, moving the skirt up a shade so that it'll be even with the bottom edge of the front panels instead. Flicking the sharp end of a pin over the gathers will help even them out. Then I finish pinning the skirt in place. The skirt and bodice get sewn together with a straight stitch, backstitching at the beginning and end of the seam to make sure it holds tight. I try to be sure to remove all my pins when I'm sewing. While some people are comfortable sewing over the top of pins, I've ruined a sewing machine by hitting a pin. It damaged the whole head of the machine. I can't afford a new sewing machine, so I'll use caution. I trim this hem a little since the back and center panels are a bit longer. Then I finish the seam with a zigzag stitch. We're almost done with the sewing part now. The last part of construction is to close the back of the skirt. I pin the sides of the skirt together. I start at the bottom edge, backstitch, then sew about 2/3 of the way up the skirt. Then I turn and sew off the side of this seam, backstitching to finish it. This little jog over creates a slightly inset opening in the back, which means you won't have any gaps when you put it on your doll. Now the dress is all constructed. All that's left is decoration and a closure. I add a ribbon and a pair of bows to the waist of mine. I cut the ribbons a little longer than they need to be, so I can make them a uniform length once the bows are tied. Before sewing the ribbons onto the dress, I use a flame to melt the ends of the ribbon so they won't ravel. Be careful if you do this, it's really easy to burn yourself. Or set your ribbon on fire like I did in the corset tutorial. Let's not do that again, right? Then I sew the sash ribbon and the bows to the front of the dress by hand. I love how perfectly this purple ribbon matches the embroidery. The tails on the bows are a little higher than I'd like, so I tack them down by pulling them downward and stitching them to the dress, just under the edge of the bow's knot. Then, last of all, I finish the back with some Velcro. Snaps are nice, but I hate sewing them on, so for most of my own doll clothes, I use Velcro, especially on these little ones. And there it is, the finished dress. I love how cute and feminine it is. I kind of wish I could make one in a bunch of other colors, but I don't have a lot of options in the embroidered tool right now. Oh well, maybe in the future. And that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.